I agree, and this like got me into trouble with people who with my fans, I guess I would say. I agree. I mean, with my family who says that Trump would be worse, but what I definitely well, my mom and I have like the same politics. But in
Mhm.
terms of what I know is going to happen is that Bernie Bros are going to be blamed in my like extended family, and so I'll have to just like agree to disagree with why Trump lost. Why, excuse me, why Trump won.
So let's get into it. Why did Trump win? Because my big takeaway, frankly, from this is that because Kamala Harris received 15 million fewer votes than Joe Biden did in 2020, and Donald Trump managed to win with 3 million fewer votes than he had in the last time around, that it's very difficult to attribute this to anything other than the Democratic Party's failure to turn out its own base. As much as I would frankly love to take credit for it as a Green Party voter, and to demonstrate the power of the Green Party, it's hard for me to see this as anything other than the Democratic Party failing to excite its own voters, failing to get its own voters. What do you guys think?
Said you take it away. I defer
Yeah,
to
I
you. Go
mean,
first.
I mean, okay, so I'm not an expert in every part of the country. So, that's part of why I was like 50-50 about this election because I knew that Trump would win this region of the country. I knew he'd win on the whole Sun Belt because I know a lot about it.
And just for the audience's sake, Zed, you're talking about coming from Georgia.
Yeah, yeah, I live outside Atlanta. And so like I knew that. I didn't really understand the Midwest. I'm not 100% sure like what its structural leans are and stuff. But anyway, so when I looked at the results, I think yeah, part of like what you were saying is part of it. Like the Democrats did not hit their turnout targets at all in like parts of, south of Atlanta, so on and so forth. And that certainly contributed to their loss. On the other hand, Trump's not an incumbent this time, although I guess he kind of is because he used to be president. I don't really know how you would rank him, but because he was an incumbent in 2020, that probably boosted his turnout somewhat as well, just naturally. And so the fact that he wasn't this time might kind of explain the fewer votes if that's what ends up happening. I know we're still counting votes. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is like a friend of mine made this point that when you have a Democratic primary, right, you get a chance to stress test the candidates, but you also get a chance to like just figure out who your base is, like who are your voters, like who are they literally, like what's the composition, also like what do they want, and that never happened with Kamala Harris, right? Because they hid Joe Biden's condition all the way through late summer. Once everybody figured it out, the cat was out of the bag. They're like, oh crap, we got to replace him. Some party leaders wanted to have a mini primary. I don't know how that would have worked, but that's not even what happened. They just installed Kamala Harris, right? Harris was not stress tested in any way. And the Democrats lacked the opportunity to see what like their national presidential base might look like what their voters were demanding, who they were, where they were turning out, the composition, so on and so forth. And so I think they spent a lot of this like last month of, or maybe more long than that, probably trying to court like a Bush, like an older like Bush Cheney voter, that really doesn't exist anymore, right? Like Trump like kicked them out of the party, or they transitioned them into his team. They don't really exist anymore. And a friend of mine here in Georgia who's been involved in politics here, he was telling me for weeks, because he was also skeptical of this strategy. Look, I think the swing voter in this election is actually like a young minority person. And I think he was
Mm.
right, right? I think the turnout numbers suggest that he's correct. And also some of the persuasion numbers. I think the fact that Trump boosted his Latino percentage of the vote from 35% to 42% counts for that. AP Votecast suggests that he boosted his black support two times from 2020 to 2024, largely focused on black men. I think in Georgia, the survey, the exit poll suggests 16%. Of course, that's not 100% like, legit because it's an exit poll. But I think all those things account for the fact that the Democrats kind of ended up chasing voters that don't exist anymore or are not really gettable.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
I
a
think
really, yeah, go
they
ahead. I'm
took
sorry.
and they kind of depressed slash persuaded a lot of their camp to go in the other direction. Because I don't know. I think that they kind of looked at, I think Democrats kind of look at minority voters as like mobilization voters, right? Meaning they're all on their side, but like they just need to like make sure they're not apathetic or forget when the voting day is, blah, 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 do GOTV with them. But the reality is that they're also persuadable voters. A lot of minorities did not like what Democrats were selling, right? So they either stayed home, they voted third party, or they voted for Trump, right? And all three of those things are bad outcomes for Democrats, right? Either one of those things is a problem for them, right? So I think that's kind of what happened. That's my initial take. I mean, as we get more data over the days and weeks, it may change a little bit, but that's what it looks like right now to me.
I appreciate that. And I think a lot of what you said just there resonates with me is that That was Zaid Jilani, independent journalist, formerly my colleague at The Intercept. We also have with us today Malaika Jabali, just joining us in the chat. Welcome, Malaika.
Hi, Brianna. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Also an independent journalist, author of It's Not You, It's Capitalism, and someone who I really wanted to be a part of this conversation because she, I think, gave the most insightful take back in 2018 after Trump's first win as to what was going on in Wisconsin, particularly with some shifts that we were seeing with Black voters, and actually spoke to them, something that wasn't happening a lot in the media at the time. And I think probably can offer some more substantive assessments of what is driving the voter trends that Zaid just alluded to. And rounding out the panel here today is podcast favorite Katie Halper, hardest working woman on the left, host of the Katie Halper Show and Useful Idiots. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be talking to you guys. Such
All right, Katie,
smart people.
This is a dream lineup for me. Katie, I want to give you an opportunity to weigh on anything that Zaid said, but then also perhaps give your impression of what the mainstream media takeaways seem to be in these first 12 to 24 hours after the election.
Yeah. Well, something I'll say that I noticed, and I didn't know who was going to win. I think my friend, I remember actually it was a couple weeks ago, and I was texting with people, one friend, she asked me about Trump. At the same time, someone else, while I'm texting back and forth with her, asked me who I thought would win. And then a chat I'm in with 3 people also had the same question. And every one of them said Trump. And I was like, oh, I guess, yeah, it's going to, I mean, if all these smart people think Trump, it very well might be him. At the beginning, I was like, Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate. She did terribly when she ran. This is a terrible decision. It's terrible that they covered up Joe's, cognitive decline. Then after the debate between Kamala and Trump, because I thought that Trump was kind of the Biden of that debate, like he seemed out of it and cognitively not all there. I was like, sure, she could actually win this. And then I thought that for a little bit afterwards, but then his attacks didn't really land. I mean, because his attacks weren't landing at first, but then they started to land, I think. And apologies, by the way, I'm very sick. So apologies for my voice. And also if I'm not as sharp and focused as usual. But what I remember thinking was that all of the messaging from the Democrats was stuff that hardcore Trump haters would respond to, but anyone who didn't already hate Trump and love the Democrats would not leave the house. Over.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. And that aligns with something that Zaid was saying. Also, this sort of Cheneyification of the Democratic Party, whatever you think of the debate about whether the Democratic Party should go more to the left or more to the right, Democrats have to contend with the reality that they put all of their effort into flipping these moderate voters, these voters that Chuck Schumer famously said, if we can flip these kind of affluent housewives in Connecticut, we can lose all of these Bernie bro working class voter types.
Right.
The reality is that in the 2020 election, 94% of Republicans voted for Trump. And in the 2020 election, 24% of Republicans voted for Trump. There was absolutely no movement on how people who identified as conservative actually voted. What's going on? I mean, like, are we really going to sit here and have a whole nother cycle where we have a debate in a very 2016, 2017 way about the merits of moving right? Malaika, I'll go to you.
I think we're at a turning point. We don't know. I think we thought that maybe 2020 or 2016 would have been the turning point. What is it really going to take? The Democratic Party doesn't really stand for anything as party leadership. As you talked about the chainification of Kamala Harris's campaign, on one hand, she's appealing to her identity, her experience in HBCUs, being a Black woman. And so she was frequently going to Wisconsin. I felt like every other weekend she was in Milwaukee. And so the ground game was there. The engagement was there. But what are you engaging people on? If these are multiple celebrity rallies, but you're not really going to the Northwest side or the North side of Milwaukee, which is where a lot of Black working class people have been having complaints, and they've been talking about the economic anxiety that they're experiencing, you're sending mixed messages. When you say that you have a strategy and you have policies for Black men, but you're talking about cryptocurrency, most people, that is so obscure. You know, I think she was really kind of like what they're doing with the suburban, like Philadelphia voters that they've been talking about, they were doing that with Black men and focusing on a very niche group of them. And so if you talk to some organizers kind of behind the scenes, they're organizing for the Democratic Party, so they're not going to really say it on record. They will say she is not addressing the working class enough. So there are multitudes within the Democratic Party, and I don't think you can take any of them for granted. You know, you got the bougie Black folks, you got the progressive white folks, but if she's also, you know, making sure that she's talking about the most lethal fighting force in the world, are you getting the progressive white voter? And there's a lot of that in the Great Lakes. You know, I think like Zaid said, it's going to take some time for us to actually figure out what happened in these battleground states. Wisconsin actually had a higher voter turnout for Kamala Harris than it did President Biden. So I don't think it was necessarily voter enthusiasm. I just think Donald Trump energized more of his base. And so how will the Democratic Party do that on mixed messages?
It's not you, it's capitalism. Well, what a name. According to the description, the book is a palatable argument for socialism that skips the whole authoritarianism, people starving part. Big if true, but I wouldn't get my hopes up. The Democratic Party in its current state stands for a number of things: healthcare for all, open immigration policies, abortion rights, and censorship. I think that's stuff. Brianna's last question was interesting, so let's dive into that a little bit. First, there was movement between the 2020 and 2024 election. The turnout was vastly different, so there's that. She is posing a legitimate complaint, however. If the left wants to win an election, they have to appeal to as much of their voter base as possible. The problem is, voters and politicians have lost sight of the nature and purpose of politics, so it's no wonder that they're having so much trouble getting their interests to align. And yes, this issue is happening on the right too. They're just appealing more to the objectively greater good at the moment than the left is. That's why they won the last election. We'll explore what's happening on the right later, but if you don't properly understand what the nature and purpose of politics is, you won't have good politics. And bad politics are hard to impossible to sell. That's why politicians resort to lying and smoke screening. So what is the nature and purpose of politics? Well, politics by nature is a morality debate. You could probably guess that its purpose is to answer questions on morality. What should be done in any given societal situation? What should the government be doing? And what should the people be doing? Answering these questions is the nature of politics, and people can approach them from one of two foundational directions. There are two kinds of people in the world. One believes that any conceivable sacrifice is worth giving up in the right situation, like Abel, who offered the firstborn of his flock. The other believes that there are things that should never be sacrificed, no matter the situation, like Cain, who would not sacrifice his first fruits. This is the fundamental difference that splits the right and the left. The right is like Abel, of course. With their bootstraps and do what's right attitude, they, by nature, are the ones who believe in sacrificing for the greater good. The left, on the other hand, is like Cain. While all of us make sacrifices in order to live in a proper society, and even most people on the left accept this as fair and logical, over the years, the left has repeatedly proven that they'd be willing to turn America on its head in order to gain or preserve their right to personal freedom. Fundamentally, the left believes that there's no situation where sacrificing the ability to be yourself is acceptable, whereas the right by nature is much more willing to sacrifice their personal freedoms in order to achieve what they believe is an ideal society. Clearly, Christianity has had a strong influence on our political spectrum, but the story of Cain and Abel couldn't have been written if these archetypes hadn't already been well established a very long time ago. This divide begs the obvious question: who's correct? Short answer, both, but one is more. If you thought it was Abel, you would be wrong, but close. While we do and must make many sacrifices for the greater good, obeying the law, respecting polite society, etc., it's even more true that there are certain things that are never worth sacrificing. The prime example of that is free speech. Without it, we have only two options: oppression or anarchy, enforced silence or unrelenting bloodshed. But the sacrifices we make for the greater good can't be underestimated. We have law and order because of this. We can't own slaves because of this. We have America because of this. This is the only true thing that separates humanity from animals. After all, having free speech is for the greater good. The only reason the left tops the right, and that they're not just flat out equal, is because if society had to somehow choose between free speech or the greater good, the correct answer is free speech. Books like Animal Farm, Fahrenheit 451, and my personal favorite, 1984, make the point very well. pretty much every other country on earth is a prime example of this point too. The fact that they don't have free speech means that they are not the sanctuary that people run to seeking freedom. Fundamentally, both sides are very, very correct. The divisive nature of our politics brought about by having a two-party system is so wastefully unnecessary. If we think back to the questions of politics, what should be done in any given societal situation, what should the government be doing, and what should the people be doing, there are objective answers to each of these questions. And if we all debated enough, we could find them. What America needs to learn in terms of politics is 3 things. Number 1, where's your moral foundation? Are you more Cain or are you more Abel? Know where your bias leans in order to be prepared for debate. Number 2, understand just how correct your opponent is. The outcome for what you want for the world is likely not that different from your opponent. Suffering is painful to watch, so most people want everyone to be happy. It's simply easier to live that way. The disagreements tend to appear in how we get to a place where everyone is happy. That's where productive conversations happen, and we need to focus on that. Again, debate. Number 3, no one isn't worth talking to. This is probably the most grievous mistake we make as a society on both sides. Both political parties have decided that way too many people aren't worth talking to and that way too many conversations aren't worth having. This couldn't be further from the truth. Everyone is worth talking to, and every conversation is not only worth having, but needs to be had if someone, anyone, still feels that it needs to be had. If we manage to pull off these 3 relatively simple things, there's literally no problem we wouldn't be able to solve, eventually, and we would do so together. But the question that Malika is pondering is valid and worth answering. How should Democrats move forward? If the goal is to energize their base, they need to find out what their base wants, come up with legitimate ways to get there. If your base is telling you that they want it to be easier to afford groceries and gas, listen, acknowledge it, then figure out a way to make it happen legitimately. And by that, I mean in a way that'll actually make it through the levers of democracy in a timely manner. But politicians simply abiding by the will of their voters is insufficient for maintaining an energized base and for creating good and effective policy. Letting them guide what goes through too much leads to less productivity instead of more, which leads to unfulfilled promises, which leads to losing elections. Voters need to be educated on what's possible to implement quickly with democracy, and what's the best way to do that? I can't say it enough, folks. Debate. Debate politicians, debate civilians, debate foreigners, debate societal rejects. Things that can be implemented quickly in democracy are things that most people can agree on. The only way you're going to get most people to agree is to let most people weigh in and figure out a compromise that doesn't make anyone want to walk away from the table. If we talk to each other to determine the objectively correct answer for any given situation, voting on leaders, policies, and issues would become extremely one-sided, the side of the truth. If Democrats encourage debate, like they should, especially as the original party that stood for free speech, they should have no problem winning elections because most people would have already agreed on the public record about what direction the country should be moving in. They could choose to be the side standing more in the way of what the people want, or they could be the side that tries harder to propel the people's wants forward. At the same time, if Democrats encourage debate to the degree debates should be encouraged, there would be no Democratic Party, or Republican Party for that matter. The two would merge into one through the power of speech and objectivity. I have a few specific suggestions. 1, never run away from a public policy debate ever again. It's a complete disrespect to what's right for society. Number 2, talk to your voter base and actually listen. Agreeing with the point made by Zed, Democrats have lost sight of who these people are, so I would start there. After you know who your people are, find out what's bothering them and what they want done about it. Then find out if the other side is bothered by the same thing too. If they aren't, debate until the other side agrees that it's a problem or it's determined that it was never a problem in the first place. Problem solved. If it is determined that it's a problem, then get the other side's opinion on what to do about it and see how well it aligns with what your voters want. If it doesn't, there's that magic word again. Debate until it does. Number 3, talk to the other side. Don't just do it in a reactionary way about problems that have already occurred. There's too much time pressure for that to be efficient or sufficient. Preemptively debate so that we're prepared for issues and can prevent them from arising altogether. We need people who have hated and dismissed each other to have meaningful discussions. We need people like Vosh to debate people like Steven Crowder. We need Brianna to be debating Candace Owens. We need MSNBC debating Fox News live on CNN every day. How good that would be for society seems to be exceeded only by how little people understand that. And it genuinely boggles my mind. It seems so obvious to me. We will never get everyone to agree on everything, but most people can agree on this one thing. Suffering sucks. People don't want to see, feel, or hear about it. The good news is, we are fully capable of stopping it, but we can only do so if we truly work together for a change.